Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So, reading today from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 2, Chapter 7, Text 24. Yasma adad udadhir uddhabhayanga vepo margam sapadyari puram haravadidhakshoho dure suhrin matita rosha shushona drishtya tatapyamana makaro raga nakra chakraha yasma adad udadhir udabhayanga vepo margam sapadya aripuram haravadhidakshoho dure suhrin mathitaro shashushona drishtya tatapyamana makaro raganakra chakraha yasma adad udadhiri udhabhayanga vepo margam sapadya aripuram haravadhidakshoho dure suhrin mathitaro shashushona drishtya tatapyamana makaro raganakra chakraha yasma adad udadhir udabhayanga vepo margam sapadya aripuram haravadhidakshoho dure suhin mathitaro shashushona drishtya tatapyamana makaro raganakra chakraha yasma adadu dadhirudha bhayanga vepo margam sapadya aripuram haravadhidakshoho dure suhrin matitaro shashushona drishtya tatapyamana makaro ragachakra chakraha yasma tadu dadhir udhabhayanga vepo margam sapadya aripuram haravadhidakshoho dure suhin matitaro shashushona drishtya tatapyamana makaro raganakra chakraha yasmai, unto whom adat gave udadhihi, the great Indian Ocean, udha bhaya, affected by fear, anga vepaha, bodily trembling, margam, way, sapadi, quickly, aripuram, the city of the enemy, haravat, like that of Hara, Mahadev, Didhakshoho, desiring to burn to ashes, Dure, at a long distance. Suhrit, intimate friend. Mathita, being aggrieved by. Rosha, in anger. Sushona, red hot. Drishtya, by such a glance. Tatapyamana, burning in heat. Makara, sharks. Uraga, snakes. Nakra, crocodiles. Chakraha, circle. Translation. The personality of Godhead Ramachandra, being aggrieved for his distant, intimate friend Sita, glanced over the city of the enemy of Ravana with red-hot eyes like those of Hara, who wanted to burn the kingdom of heaven. The great ocean, trembling in fear, gave him his way because its family members, the aquatics like the sharks, snakes, and crocodiles, were being burnt by the heat of the angry red-hot eyes of the Lord. Purport. The personality of Godhead has every sentiment of a sentient being, like all other living beings, because he is the chief and original living entity, the supreme source of all other living beings. He is the Nitya, or the chief eternal amongst all other eternals. He is the chief one, and all others are the dependent many. The many eternals are supported by the one eternal, and thus both the eternals are qualitatively one. Due to such oneness, both the eternals constitutionally have a complete range of sentiments, but the difference is that the sentiments of the chief eternal are different in quantity from the sentiments of the dependent eternals. When Ramachandra was angry and showed his red-hot eyes, the whole ocean became heated with that energy. So much so that the aquatics within the great ocean felt the heat, and the personified ocean trembled in fear and offered the Lord an easy path for reaching the enemy's city. The impersonalists will see havoc in this red-hot sentiment of the Lord because they want to see negation in perfection. Because the Lord is absolute, the impersonalists imagine that in the absolute the sentiment of anger, which resembles mundane sentiments, must be conspicuous by absence. Due to a poor fund of knowledge, they do not realize that the sentiment of the absolute person is transcendental to all mundane concepts of quality and quantity. Had Lord Ramchandra's sentiment been of mundane origin, how could it disturb the whole ocean and its inhabitants? Can any mundane red-hot eye generate heat in the great ocean? These are factors to be distinguished in terms of the personal and impersonal conceptions of the absolute truth. As it is said in the beginning of the Srimad Bhagavatam, the absolute truth is a source of everything, so the absolute person cannot be devoid of the sentiments that are reflected in the temporary mundane world. Rather, the different sentiments found in the absolute, either in anger or in mercy, have the same qualitative influence, or, in other words, there is no mundane difference of value because these sentiments are all on the absolute plane. Such sentiments are definitely not absent in the absolute, as the impersonalists think, making their mundane estimation of the transcendental world. Again, the translation. The personality of Godhead, Ramachandra, being aggrieved for his distant intimate friend, Sita, glanced over the city of the enemy, Ravana, with red-hot eyes like those of Hara, who wanted to burn the kingdom of heaven. The great ocean, trembling in fear, gave him his way because its family members, the aquatics like the sharks, snakes, and crocodiles, were being burnt by the heat of the angry red-hot eyes of the Lord. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Om Jnanatimmirandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupah Kadamahyam Dadati Svapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yutapada Kamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhan Vitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindho Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Namo Mahavadanyaya Krishna Prema Pradayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namne Gora Tushe Namaha Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya eva cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So we're continuing this very sweet part of the second canto. I said last week as well, the second canto can sometimes feel a little dense or philosophical, and then once we reach this part, it's a very sweet switch, change in gears, and now this is a constant series of the nectar of all of these incarnations of the Lord, and a condensed nutshell overview of their very sweet pastimes. And in these texts, we're finding, of course, Srila Prabhupada, as always, is giving his transcendental purports. And in this purport today, rather than taking an elaboration on the pastime, instead Srila Prabhupada is doing what Srila Prabhupada so often does in his purports. He is giving the correct contextual way of accessing these texts. Because although pastimes are transcendental, even though they stand on their own, sometimes by the misfortune we may have from all sorts of things, from our material conditioning to maybe having the unfortunate association of impersonalists, there may be some tendencies to misread or to not properly access the shlokas of Srimad Bhagavatam as they are. And so Srila Prabhupada has given his purports. It's rather sweet that Prabhupada refers to them not as his commentary, not as his tika or his bhashya, but as his purports. Because a commentary, in many ways, a commentary is an elaboration on the further implications maybe of some words, or maybe deeper sort of mining on what the implications are or what the various viewpoints can be of a text, especially if one reads like Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's tikas or something. Sometimes he'll just make a whole point about this Sanskrit word could mean this, but it could also mean this, or for poetic license this word has been written like that. However, Srila Prabhupada's purports take a very different character compared to the tikas and bhashyas of before, because again, they aren't a commentary speaking upon grammatical features or philosophical implications, as important as those are and as much as those do appear in his purports. But essentially the idea for purport is, what is the actual message of the text? What is it in its essence? Not so much what are the further ramifications, what are the further applications, what are the further contextual details that may be built upon the shloka, but rather what is this saying? What is its value to us? In what way can it not be valuable to us? Which is the focus of Prabhupada's purport today. And so, when delivering all these transcendental things through the mercy of Srila Prabhupada, he clarifies the nature of these texts of Grantharaj Srimad Bhagavatam. So, today's one is discussing the wonderful pastimes of Lord Ramchandra. When we look at the greater Srimad Bhagavatam, Ramchandra, he doesn't get too much of the spotlight. It's only maybe a fraction of a chapter in 9th canto is really all he gets. But in this series here, he's been getting a bit more of a spotlight. All the other incarnations maybe had one text referring to them. However, he's getting a few here. And there is a reason for that. Ramchandra does actually play a rather interesting position in the great pastimes of the Lord. We know if we go to India, the two most popular forms of the Lord are Ramchandra and Krishna. Even though we'll find maybe in temple worship, Narayan also takes a very predominant role. In the hearts of the general public, or of the congregational lay Vaishnavas, if you will, it is the pastimes of Ramchandra and the pastimes of Krishna which have so much captivated the popular devotional imagination, so to speak. And again, the reason for that is somewhat clear, because Ramchandra, we know that Rupa Goswami especially has sort of discovered this idea of rasa being such an integral part of the Supreme Lord, of rasa really proclaiming what it means for the Supreme Lord to be the Supreme Lord, and therefore he gave so many Upanishadic aphorisms like Rasavai Saha and Akhila Rasamrita Murti. The reciprocal mellows, the reciprocal moods, so much define the Supreme Lord. And furthermore, those qualities which allow those rasas to be enjoyed so much more. We know he gives such a wonderful hierarchy of manifestations and forms built upon the degree to which they manifest the wonderful qualities. So, it is because of rasa that the Supreme Lord is the Supreme Lord. It is because he is able to taste so much rasa that of those personalities of the Godhead, that supreme personality of Godhead is Krishna. But in Ramchandra, we find more than other personalities, more than other forms. We find a greater degree, although not as much as Krishna, of rasa. Narayan does not have parents. Even the Nrsingadev, I guess you could say he has a pillar, but pillars don't really have so many, don't reciprocate as much sweet rasa. But Ramchandra does. So Ramchandra, he has, and we also know later on, he'll have children, he has parents, he also has, there's also a bit of Sakya ras. There's a bit of Vatsalya ras, there's a bit of Sakya ras with Lakshman. And like this, so we will find some rasa, and where there is rasa, there is a greater degree of emotion. Srila Prabhupada is making this wonderful point here, which he makes often, that how can we deny to the Supreme Personality what we can so happily grant to the individual, smaller personalities. So, because of this, where there is rasa, there is greater amount of emotion. And this emotion can be greatly misinterpreted. In Krishna, we know, Srila Prabhupada so often hammers home this point of the rasas of Krishna being very easy to misinterpret and therefore should not be so readily rushed into. And here we find a similar sentiment Srila Prabhupada is making with Lord Ramchandra. So in the case of Krishna, we find that it is the sahajiya tendency, the tendency of the sahajiyas to say that this is a mundane emotion when anger is being felt. And in the case of Ramchandra, it is the impersonalists. So there we find performing this erroneous attempt at conflating the mundane emotions with the transcendental ones. We find the two great enemies of the Bhaktivedanta purports condemned. In other places, the Sahajiyas, and here the Mayavadis. But ultimately, we can find, at least in this purport here, that their error is coming from the same place. It is from, again, this arrogance almost to see the behavior of the Transcendental Lord and then conflate it with whatever emotion oneself has experienced. To bring the Supreme Lord's emotions and feelings onto one's own level is a error that, again, produces these two great opponents to the genuine transcendental conclusions of the Vedic literature. So, we find there's all these rasas. However, we do not find so much the Madhurya ras in Ramchandra's pastimes. And we know there's the great reason for that. Lord Ramchandra has taken the Eka Patni Vrat, the Vrat to take one wife, which was seen as a great thing. There would have been a period in history where it didn't seem so amazing a thing, but it's now wrapping around again, and it's an amazing thing again now to only take one wife. And because of this, we don't find such a proliferation of the Madhurya ras. We find that in Krishna Lila, obviously. But we do not find it so much in Ramchandra Leela. And this ties in as well to Ramchandra's identity as the Maryada Purushottam, that great personality who so much embodies the adherence to ethical rules and ethical systems. We know, obviously, when he got cast out into exile, it's almost superhuman. One can say that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead because he can sort of play around with the rules and regulations at times. He sort of plays it hard and fast with the rules and ethical systems, of course, to achieve their purpose. Ethical rules systems only have any value if they're pleasing to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So if the Supreme Personality of Godhead wants to do something pleasing to him, he hasn't actually done anything wrong or violated any system. However, in terms of Leela, Krishna does seem to really break some rules, and only he can do that because he is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. On the flip side, Lord Ramchandra seems to follow so strongly these rules to such a degree that only the Supreme Personality of Godhead could do it. In the same way that Krishna is showing that he is Swayam Bhagavan, that he is the Supreme Personality by breaking these rules, Ramchandra is showing that he is the Supreme Personality of Godhead by following them to such a great extent that it is superhuman. Only Ramchandra could follow so wonderfully the dharmic codes. Again, how many people could, upon hearing of their exile, say as Ramchandra did, that today I received such great fortune. Normally, a child can choose by one action only to please their mother or their father. But today, I'm so fortunate that I can both fulfill my father's honor by granting this request, and also I can fulfill the desire of my mother. Obviously not the mother by blood. So, like this, such a response is almost superhuman. And we see, obviously, later on in the pastimes of Lord Ramchandra that this comes up again. We know Durvasa Muni once. Durvasa Muni is famous for his tapasya. He's a recurring character, often in the Vedic literatures. He appears often, and he's known for his severe sort of tapasyas and austerities. However, because of that, maybe because of that, he is also known for his severe anger. He's known for sometimes being rather rash and harsh, and if something doesn't happen the way that he particularly likes it, he's known to be a little trigger-happy with curses and other not so pleasant words. And so we know Ramchandra, he was keeping the he was welcoming a guest who was also a Muni, and he was upon the pretense that no one will disturb us. However, very well timed, Durvasa Muni came at that time, and he wanted to speak to Ramchandra, and Lakshman was there as the very, in this case, unfortunate gatekeeper. And so, because Ramchandra allowed Durvasa Muni in, because he was afraid, obviously, of that infamous anger, what could happen, so he let him in. However, because that word of Ramchandra is broken, there was a very severe consequence for Lakshman, and he was sent off because of that. So because of this, we see, again, even for his brother, who voluntarily went out with him, Ramchandra, he is so strict, following the codes of ethics and morality, again, to a superhuman degree. And then, of course, we know very famously, overhearing the words of one of his citizens, he casts out Sita from the kingdom in order to show what is the heart of ethics, what is the height of it. This is the extent to which his morality was there. And so in order to show for his citizens and for his subjects and all, he manifested this. And again, what a hard thing to do. It's difficult enough for a mundane sort of relationship to cast out their beloved, let alone for the Supreme Lord, for his Swarupa Shakti. And yet he did so, again, superhuman feat of ethics. That's not to say that Ramchandra is entirely sort of is a boring person. Because sometimes it can seem like this. There's a reason why Krishna is seen so sweet and so beautiful. Because sometimes he seems to lie, because sometimes he seems to steal, because he's teasing, because he's doing all these things. Even in the slightly less sweet form, in the Dwarka form, there's still that sweetness of Krishna breaking his vow to not take a weapon. Again, he is breaking his own word, but it is sweet because it is coming for his love for his devotees. So sometimes people might have like this, but Ramchandra also has many sweet pastimes, especially in his childhood. There's one I was hearing, Mahanidhi Swami was relating this from Atma Tattva Prabhu. And it said that once when Ramchandra was a small child, he was still not fully trained in the arts of archery. Him and Lakshman, they were walking one day, and they saw this woman with a very big nose ring. And she had this immensely large nose ring. It was comically large. And so Lakshman, he began to laugh. Being a small child, he was laughing, and he was sort of, nudged Ramchandra with his elbow and said, "Look at that nose ring. Isn't it absurd?" And so Ramchandra and Lakshman, they thought in their childhood pastimes, they said, "Hey, let's do a little pastime." And so they got ready with their archery. Obviously, their archery, we know later on, all of those mystic potencies, all those great sort of things could be done with the firing of one arrow. I still remember when I was little, sometimes we would watch the Mahabharata, those old Mahabharata TV show, or the old Ramayana, and they'd shoot one arrow and then it would become 50 arrows and then it would fly across. So things like that. There are all these things. But Lakshman and Ramchandra, their education had not yet complete, so they didn't really have full mastery over these things. However, it was a big enough nose ring, so Lakshman then fired an arrow, and he thought, "I will change the size of this nose ring." And shooting it, it went through like a goal. And then after going through the arrow, because of its slight misfiring, it shrunk down. But it shrunk down so much that it actually closed her whole nose, and she was no longer able to breathe. Then Lakshman began to worry. He's thinking, "Oh no, what have I done? What's going on?" Now, because their teacher, he was a bit behind them, and they'd done this because he was looking away. They were thinking, as children do, now we are outside of the supervision of our teacher, we can act out a bit. So looking back, they were thinking, "Oh no, he's going to turn around and he's going to see this poor, suffocating woman. Now we're really going to get it, So then Ramchandra, he then fires an arrow as well. And firing it, he tries to find some tiny little space that he can fit his arrow through. And he finds just a small fraction. And aiming very precisely, he fires it through. And then the nose ring becomes very large, but it becomes even larger than it was before. And then so now this woman, she sees these boys and she gets angry and she says, "What's going on? I don't know what's happening. I'm so confused." And then Lakshman Ramchandra said, don't worry. We're just playing around, we're shooting some arrows, you don't need to worry. This isn't some defect in your nose ring that you have to worry the whole day. You're going to get suffocated. And then she said, "I don't believe you." And then they shot off more arrows and they did more things and sort of completely changed the shape of the nose ring to prove. And she was completely, shocked by this. So, like this we see there's some sweet pastime still. Ramchandra, he's not necessarily a bore, so to speak. And furthermore, just because there was not that Madhurya Rasa does not mean that there were not elements of it. We know, obviously, of the sages at Dandaranya, which are prayed to be gopis later on in Krishna Leela. And actually, there's several descriptions of things like this. It's said when I can't remember, it's Kaushal or Shokal. I've got the letters mixed up. But in one place, when Ramchandra visited, it said that all of the women, they were seeing him and they were seeing his beautiful form. And seeing this beautiful form, they're completely captivated. And Ramchandra, being the Supreme Personality of Godhead, he obviously knew what was in their hearts. But obviously, also being the Supreme Personality of Godhead in the form of Ramchandra, he could not really reciprocate any of it. And it said because of his Ekapatni Vrat, almost like Lakshman. We know Lakshman so famously when the jewelry of Sita was left after her kidnapping. Ramchandra was bereaved, however, and completely distraught. However, Lakshman, seeing them, he could not recognize any of them except for the ankle bells, because it said he never looked beyond the ankle. So strict was his adherence to dharmic codes. And so Ramchandra, in a way reminiscent of that, would not even look at any of them. Because it was clear, he was making the point, I've taken Ekapatni Vrat. I will not even look at you. However, it said that out of the corner of his eye there was a slight glance. They didn't receive the full vision, because that would be too much of a violation of the dharmic codes. However, he was allowed to, by some corner of the eye, give a vision. And he did this again also in Mithila, it said. And then there was something slightly different, but the message was the same when he returned without Sita in Ayodhya. There was a similar thing. There was a pact of all these denizens of Ayodhya who wished to come to marry Ramchandra. And the message that he sent with the corner of his eye, and that he sort of later made in other ways, was that, I'm Ramchandra, I'm Maryada Purushottam. I cannot even look at you, let alone marry you. I've taken Ekapatni Vrat, I cannot engage in this way. But just you wait, I'm going to come again in Dwapar Yuga. And when I come again in Dwapar Yuga, this restriction will not be there. And then I will be able to reciprocate your desire to have this madhurya, romantic love, with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So he made that message clear. He did not look at them at all. However, he said, later on, I will reciprocate this mood. And in this way, Krishna Leela is fulfilling even Ramchandra Leela. This is why Krishna Leela is the completion of everything. And Krishna, again, he is that original form. Even Ramchandra at times needs to appeal to the fullness of, again, rasa, which is defining what it means for the Supreme Lord to be the Supreme Lord. Even Ramchandra needs to appeal to the fullness of Rasaraj, Krishna. And again, here we find that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. However, speaking of those sort of pastimes, it comes back to that initial point, that such things are not so much to be spoken about or dwelled in. We know Srila Prabhupada will often refer to Radharani as Srimati Radharani, which is a very opulent way of referring to Srimati Radharani. And I remember I was reading once, it was in an academic forum, and there was this person he was translating. I think he was translating the Sandarbhas, the Satsandarbhas. It was some academic translation. And they were just speaking about points of translation. And in the original text, it had only said Radha. However, in his translation, he had written Srimati Radharani. And one of this other scholars said, oh, this is an ISKCONism. This is, you're letting some sort of ISKCONism, some sort of ISKCONese, they'll sometimes refer to it as, the style that Srila Prabhupada would use, and obviously Srila Prabhupada's disciples use in translating Sanskrit. Because of course, when sometimes the text will say Radha, and Prabhupada will say Srimati Radharani. And so they made this point, and I thought it was a very interesting point, because obviously for them, in their world of mental speculation and whatever, it was some point to be pulled apart. But actually it speaks for that great mercy and that great role that Srila Prabhupada has in delivering the Vedic literature. Srimati Radharani is again a very opulent name. And it is very good to keep that name in mind. Otherwise, again, people will take cheaply Radharani's position. They will not understand the majestic role that she has. And of course, at one point, that role is forgotten, but that's so far down the road, it doesn't need to be worried about right now. So, Srila Prabhupada has given such a wonderful name, again, so that this confusion cannot be had. So that this tendency to take these things cheaply will not arise. Because again, otherwise, one will take these things. Will take these things inappropriately, and they will conflate them with the temporary mundane world, which is in no way equivalent. However, again, Ramchandra did have some degree of Swakiya Madhurya. He did with his love for Sita, and as we read in this text here, as he went and marched down, we know with his great anger he caused Varuna to appear. With his great angry glance. And sometimes it may be asked, well, why didn't people just advise Ramchandra, okay, your wife's gone, now you can take sannyas, renounce the world. It's all right. Grihastha life is a lesson for you to learn to renounce these things. You've learned the lesson now. Your wife is gone. Take saffron now. No need to dwell in these things. Sometimes people might say like this, and actually Srila Prabhupada said like this sometimes as well. There's one disciple of Srila Prabhupada, I remember His Holiness Bhakti Vikas Swami, who was saying this past time. He was a Srila Prabhupada Grihastha disciple, and his wife left him for some other man. And Srila Prabhupada said, very good, now you can take to saffron. There's your problems are solved now. Now you can take to the renounced order of life. And so one may say like this. One may wonder, why not to do like this? Also, I remember I was listening to His Holiness Lokanatha Maharaj was giving a talk once. And he was actually saying that he originally was meant to be married. He was in the Brahmachari ashram, but he had a marriage that was being set up. And the whole thing was going very well. I remember when he was saying the pastime, he said his mother especially was very happy. But as the whole marriage was happening, the day was getting closer, the day was getting closer, the day was getting closer. And then just a few days before his marriage happened, actually the marriage got called off. I can't remember what reason, but it got called off and no marriage. Lokanatha Maharaj was saying, he was very much lamenting, thinking, why do bad things happen to good people? And he was very much upset, thinking, my marriage is done, I was getting, very eager for it. And then, of course, later on, and we know Lokanatha Maharaj is now actually one of the few sannyas disciples of Srila Prabhupada who had been given sannyas by Srila Prabhupada himself. So that was a great fortune. Then he was able to take that renounced order from Srila Prabhupada himself. And so, again, we find another instance of that. However, for the same reason that such advice would be very weird to give to Ramchandra, for the same reason that such advice would be very weird, his anger as well is very transcendental, and his anger as well is very beautiful. Because again, we'll see the anger, and normally when somebody gets angry, our advice is, kama, krodha, lobha, like this. This is one of the things which will take you to hell. We know, Nectar of Instruction, the beginning text, which interestingly enough is quoted from Mahabharata, the first text of Upadeshamrita. And text 2 and 3 is likely, they were paraphrased from Hatha Yoga Deepika, the great text of Hatha Yoga. It's likely Rupa Goswami, because when you look, they're very similar, the texts of text 2 and 3, their structure, only slightly changed, obviously, to speak devotionally. So it's likely Rupa Goswami there was showing, was sort of taking these in order to make a point regarding obviously Hatha Yoga is very regulated. So he was making a point there. So we know in that first, Vachu Vegam, Manasa Krodha Vegam. So we know this anger. Anger is not a very beneficial thing. And again, yet, for the same reason that this anger in Ramchandra, so angry that all of this was happening, in the same way that this anger was fine, in the same way that this anger was worshipable, in the same way it is fine for Ramchandra to chase after his wife, to show so much attachment. Because again, such attachment is transcendental. That anger is not equivalent to the anger of conditioning. Instead, it is the anger of transcendence. It is a beautiful anger, and it is worshipable. We sometimes hear of the anger of God, especially in the West. We hear of the Christian conception. There's one of the most famous sermons ever spoken. If you ever speak to any person in the Reformed Presbyterian tradition, they'll be able to tell you. Edwards, that was his name. He gave this, one of the most famous sermons ever. You'll find books always taking after it. It's called Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. And it's saying that we are all sinners in the hands of an angry God, and he will crush us at any moment if he wants to. This is the conception of God. His anger is there to destroy us. And this is a Christian conception, also an Islamic conception. Actually, if you read the Quran, there's some very many sweet things in it, but the majority of it is very much speaking of Judgment Day, when the anger of God will come, and we need to be protected from this anger. But here in the Bhagavad conception, this anger is not here to destroy us. It is here to destroy some part of us, but it is a part of us that is very well destroyed. This anger is purifying and liberating. Srila Prabhupada writes, that the sentiments found in the Absolute, either in anger or in mercy, had the same qualitative influence. The anger of the Supreme Lord, just as much as his mercy, just as much as his beauty, is there to purify, and it is beautiful, and it is worshipable. It is not something to be run away from. Like the sin in the hands of the angry God. The whole idea is that God is so great that he's allowed us to, some of us at least, to escape from that crushing wrath in his hands. No, instead, this anger is a great mercy. We should pray, maybe, to see the anger of the Supreme Lord. We know Nrsingadev, obviously, is the most associated with anger. And when Nrsingadev appears, all the demigods, they're afraid seeing him. There's something to be said of that. Because some people may wonder, well, the demigods, Vishnu normally comes to support them. Why are they afraid? But we know Nrsingadev, he comes to, and he kills that great Hiranyakashipu, and they're very relieved. So we should think again. He's come and he's killed a great demon king. Why are the demigods still so, why are they scared? He's helped them out. And it's because the demigods, as much in the mode of goodness as they may be, there's still some of that tendency. You don't become a demigod by pure devotional service. You become a demigod through performing all sorts of karma kanda activities, which still have some hint of that enjoying tendency. It's enjoyment in the mode of goodness, so it's maybe the most sanctioned, but it's still to some degree enjoyment. So the demigods, seeing this, they know, well, now he's done away with the biggest demons. There's still some of this tendency, this asur tendency. Even though we are suras, we are demigods, there's still some of that enjoying tendency in us, so there's still some fear. However, Prahlad Maharaj did not have any tendency. Prahlad Maharaj is, of course, a great, transcendental, pure devotee of the Lord, and therefore he had no fear. And instead, that anger was, again, worshipable and beautiful. So in the same way, when Ramchandra is angry, that anger is purifying, it is sweet, it is merciful, it is worshipable. The anger of the Supreme Lord is not something, again, to be afraid of, as some other conceptions may have it, but it is, again, relishable. And, in a sense, it has come only for us, or maybe not us, or maybe not me, but everyone else here. Because we know there's one purport in Nrsingadev Leela, when Prahlad Maharaj is singing the worshipable glories of Nrsingadev. And in the purport, Srila Prabhupada makes the point that why does the Supreme Lord ever appear as himself? The Supreme Lord has infinite potencies. He has all these sweet potencies, and by these potencies he can do anything. There's nothing that the Supreme Lord cannot do. If he wants to do something, he can empower somebody to do it. He can directly use his Shakti to do it. So why would the Supreme Lord ever himself appear? What is the necessity of that? And there, Srila Prabhupada writes in his purport that the Supreme Lord only ever appears as himself in order to please the devotees, that the devotees might see him. Because that is the only thing that cannot be pleased just by an energy. That is the only purpose that cannot be satisfied only by an energy. It is the devotees who wish to have darshan of the Lord. And so, all of these personal forms which appear, they appear for, of course, we know yada yada hi dharmasya. They appear for these things, but essentially, all those things could be achieved, but essentially, the Lord appears by his own sweet will in order to please his devotees. And so pastimes like these have appeared as well, in order to please his devotees. So not only are they relishable, but they should be relished. They should be relished because that was the purpose they were intended for. So these transcendental moods of the Lord, again, they're not to be equated with the mundane conception. And once they are not equated, they can be appreciated for the great merciful things that they are. And so we see, but even anger, even outside of the Supreme Lord, can be transcendental. We know, I was saying about the nectar of instruction, Prabhupada so famously says that all of these things are not to be suppressed, as the impersonalists might say. The same impersonalists who will say that Ramchandra was not fully factually supreme because he had some anger, because they cannot understand transcendental anger. And then, so Srila Prabhupada says, all of these things should be dovetailed instead in the Supreme Lord's service. And anger against those who blaspheme the Supreme Lord or the Supreme Lord's devotees is fully spiritual and fully perfect. And of course then the example of Hanuman is given. Hanuman, with his great anger, he got very angry and he burnt all of Lanka down. And so we find here that anger, even in the devotees, Srila Prabhupada himself would get angry. Actually, there's His Holiness Bhakti Charu Maharaj, I was listening to one of his remembrances of pastimes of Srila Prabhupada, and once there was a temple, and it was a temple in one of the western small temples, so still preaching outreaches being done. And so this new bhakta, he was being cultivated, and every time he would get angry, or he would hear somebody getting angry, they'd say, Prabhu, maybe chant some rounds, calm yourself down a little. And so he would hear this, and he was very much finding this an applicable teaching. It was very much helping him cope with his anger. And so one day Srila Prabhupada was visiting this temple, and something was not being done properly, and Srila Prabhupada was very angry, in this transcendental anger, and he was chastising his disciples, and he was saying, why are you doing this? Why are you doing that? And this new bhakta went up to Srila Prabhupada, and he said, maybe chant your rounds a little, calm down a bit. And Srila Prabhupada, out of his humility, he did that. Obviously, that's a complete, forget Rasa Bhas, is a complete, but of course, because that disciple-guru relationship hadn't been formalized, Srila Prabhupada, again, out of his humility, went along with it. Shri Shri Radha Gopinath Ki Jai. So Srila Prabhupada, out of his humility, he went along and he did chant some rounds, but yeah, a very sweet pastime. So people sometimes, they cannot discriminate and realize that even the devotees may have a taste of this transcendental anger. Obviously in a different portion than Ramchandra. And so Hanuman, like that, he went. He also tasted that anger, and Srila Prabhupada also tasted that anger, and all the various great acharyas did. And so then, and I'll conclude on this point, there can be the point that's made, however, I was saying that we can relish this anger, and we can relish it in Ramchandra. However, we are devotees of Krishna, or at least we're trying to be devotees of Krishna. And so one may say, what point could there be in relishing it in Ramchandra? And of course, this is there's a long elaboration that can be had on that, and I don't have time, but there's one aspect which is very pertinent, which is very sweet. Because we know Mahaprabhu, when he went out on his preaching tour into South India, he would sing, Krishna Keshava, like that he would sing. And he would also sing, Rama Raghava, Rama Raghava, Rama Raghava, Rakshama. Please protect me, Ramchandra, descendant of Raghu. Please protect me. I would like your protection. And there is a way that Ramchandra can protect us, in the same way that Nrsingadev can protect us, in the way very relevant to his pastimes. Nrsingadev protects us by destroying all those demonic anarthas that we find situated in our hearts, or at least that I find situated in my heart. And that same way we can pray to Nrsingadev to cleanse those anarthas out. And Ramchandra, in a similar way, can give protection. Again, relevant to his personality, to his qualities. Because he can give protection, how? In order to help those who are, because of course sometimes they say you pray to Krishna so your son is like Ram, Because Ramchandra, he is having these qualities that really we should cultivate. In the worship of Krishna, we should still hold strongly to the, with the integrity to the rules of dharma. So, in general, it can be said we should pray that we could be protected from adharmic influence, from adharmic conceptions, from ideas that are contrary to even mundane morality, even though it is not directly devotional, acts as a good foundation for devotion to stand upon. And even devotion itself is the essence of all dharma. So to pray to that Maryada Purush and to relish his pastimes in upholding with such integrity, such ethical qualities, this is the protection that Lord Ramchandra can give. And I'll close on one pastime related to this. When Hanuman went to Lanka and he was sent to find Sita. And we know Ravan, in contrast to Ramchandra, who took one wife, Ravan took many wives. Obviously that was allowed then, and especially a personality like Ravan, if the option was there, he would take it, So he had many, many wives. And with all these wives, they were all, kept in a sort of, they all sort of lived together, yeah? And so Hanuman, he went and he was searching through, because he was expecting Sita, although we know not the actual Sita, is like a duplicate Sita. I mean, is a duplicate, yeah? So the duplicate one, and he's looking around. But we know Hanuman also is a great brahmachari. And so he was thinking, brahmacharis ideally, especially if anyone's, we've all here read Bhakti Vikas Maharaj's Orange Book. Forget about going through the place where Matajis are all living in. Even the general association of Matajis should be minimized for a brahmachari. And here's Hanuman thinking he's going through all their rooms and looking through all of them, and he's thinking, this isn't really brahmachari principles right here. So he's going through, and Hanuman, and he's looking and he's looking and he's looking. And as he's going through, he can't find. But the whole time it's described, he's actually constantly chanting. He's constantly chanting Ram, Rama, Rama, Rama. Like that, he's meditating on the holy name of Lord Ramchandra. Thinking that with the association of the holy name, with the association of the holy name of Lord Ram, with this association, I can be so strongly associated with Dharma that I will not in any way be tempted or in any way be disturbed in this pursuit. Even though I'm surrounded in the complete opposite place of where my Dharma, especially according to ashram, where I should be. I should not be here. And this is the opposite place for cultivating the sort of ethical rules which I'm required to follow. Still, by associating with the holy name of Ram, I will be preserved. And so like that, he was constantly chanting Rama, 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 like that, while searching through. So I had some other points about Balaram, but we don't have time. So we'll conclude on that note, that we should take shelter of the holy name of the Lord, and especially we should take shelter in the beauty of the anger of the Lord, and the beauty of all the sentiments of the Lord, knowing them not to be the harsh, revolting sentiments of this world. Even love in this world is complete violence. So-called love in this world is complete violence and anger and destructive compared to even a touch of anger in the transcendental world. So we should not equate the two, but instead take shelter in their absolute oneness. Of course, not oneness in personality, but oneness in quality of these great moods, and pray that we may receive that mercy. Grantharaj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai. Namo Vishnu Padaya.